Yeah. So this one I'm gonna do on the blood horse, or let me say, thoroughbreds and Blood Horse magazine. I'm the blood horse. I taught myself how to read when I was maybe 6 years old out of the Blood Horse magazine, which I know I had my grandma's to help me, which was part of my learning and betterment on reading, and then my stepmom grounding me in my room as the redheaded stepchild, and there was a box of books, and the first layer was Danielle Still, but they were my dad's. I was like, oh, they're girls' books. They're not my dad's books. She's like, yeah, I borrowed your dad's books, and they're his books, but the rest are cowboy books, and you're a cowboy, right? And I was like, yeah, 8, 9 years old, and that was when I first started reading Louis L'Amour novels, because there was maybe 100 and something Louis L'Amour novels in that box that were my dad's. And I read my first one when I was maybe 8 or 9 and never stopped. But anyway, but at like 6, I taught myself to read in Blood Horse magazines because I knew most of the horses by their pictures, and I knew the jockeys' names. Like back then there was, which I've met Shane Sellers and Pat Day, which I thought I was named after Shane Sellers as a kid, and my dad's like, no, you're more named after a cowboy, a book, but, and then I learned later that that's not true, that Shane means as God, and it was something that, was chosen by the universe, and it was my mom that said that name. But anyway, so my grandmother, me being raised on a thoroughbred farm, and my grandmother watching the mares, all night on camera, on closed circuit camera, to the horse barns, to the foaling barn, and would stay up all night, and I would stay up with her as late as I could. And I used to love sitting on the porch on the swing, listening to storms and the crickets, and in the country and the hills, on the horse farm. And it was some of my favorite memories. I used to love picking her purple flowers. I was always a grandma's boy, which I still am. I went and rode a bicycle many miles yesterday just to see my living grandmother, and to try to have tea with her. But anyway, back to what I was getting at, the Blood Horse magazine. My grandmother was always like a lifetime subscriber of the Blood Horse, which there was hundreds of them, and which there's still hundreds of them left, but most of them were stolen, by family members that claimed them. I'm not going to say they were stolen, because, as long as they're appreciated, that's cool with me. But as a kid, I had taken those magazines and, flipped through every single page, because I just loved the horses and knew the names of most of the pictures of the horses, or I knew the jockeys' names just by what it looked like and their names. So I was able to piece together from the sires and the dames, and then the farms. I knew a bunch of the farms, all the Kentucky, elite farms, I had been on most of those farms at that time, so I got excited by reading those farms, like Claiborne or Calumet or Gainsboro, back then, but now it's Darley, but, and there was a handful of other ones, which I could still name a whole list of the present Kentucky, Stone Street's one of my favorite farms these days, Brookside, Ashford Stud, you know, my family owned a bunch of them before any of those families ever owned any of them. My family owned almost all of those farms before any of them. But anyway, my family started the two biggest banks in Kentucky, founding presidents, Whitakers and Farmers, so respect to those banks for helping my family, which I wouldn't be here, today if it wasn't for those those banks of that industry, which I've never really liked bankers, but I used to love going to banks as a kid because my family owned the banks, and, I used to love playing in vaults, And then the office, I just like the Navy base when I used to go to Great Lakes as a kid. My grandpa, seemed like he ran the place. Even though he was just Master Chief, but I got to look up to somebody that everybody else looked up to. So it was kind of cool. But anyway, so this is respect to the Blood Horse magazine, and I am grateful for them for their magazine because as a child, it is what I used to teach myself, to begin to read. Which I, say my grandma's taught me the rest, but by the time I had got to school, I was already volunteering to read everything in class for everybody else. And then by the time I got to college, the speech class, I was volunteering to go first. And by the final speech, the teacher's like, Shane, you've had a brand new pack of note cards this whole class, and you've never walked up to the podium with a note card, but you always volunteer to go first. And I just want to know how many hours you practice your speech, because I give you an A every time, but I dock you 3 points for your speech being too long. And just like this right here, I was trying to keep it under 5 minutes, and it's already at 6 minutes and 20 seconds, But I told her, I was like, well, ma'am, as she said, she's like, yeah, the only time I've seen you use your note cards is to write down every single girl's number in this room that you handed them the note card to write their number down on. But I don't think there's any girl in this room that you don't have their number. But, do you practice your speech? How many hours? And I was like, ma'am, I don't even know what my speech is going to be until I step up to this podium. I usually have about 2 or 3 ideas, and I just try to break the ice for everybody else and try to be the leader, because I know they're more afraid than I am, and I don't even know what my speech is on, and I'm not scared. Yeah. Shane Michael, prayers and blessings to all the filming. Rogue One. Hoorah. 7:15, 17.